I'm Ajamha Kanwana and I'm a part of the Gampha Medical Students Association, the GMSA's 2019 batch, and we have been maintaining this YouTube channel GMSA API since about a month now, and we have presented you a lot of videos and we have covered up a lot of lessons in biology as per the new syllabus, and we are actually doing this as a support for the 2020 A-level students who are facing difficulties in covering up their A-level syllabus due to the adverse situation in Sri Lanka that has risen due to the corona pandemic. So as for the program, today I am going to conduct a lesson in biology in English medium, and the lesson would be the last part of coordination and homeostasis, which is maintaining a constant internal environment. So let's move on to the lesson. So today's lesson would be coordination and homeostasis part 4, that is maintenance of a constant internal environment. Moving on to the lesson, first we have to learn what homeostasis is. What is homeostasis? Homeostasis is a steady state condition where body's internal environment remains relatively constant within narrow physiological limits despite significant changes in the external environment. That means no matter what happens in the external environment, how significant they are, our body's condition remains constant within narrow physiological limits. That means it tends to change slightly, but it almost remains normal. Then what is an external environment? This is easy. Surroundings outside the body are referred to as the external environment. Then what is the internal environment? Now this is a standard definition. Internal environment is the immediate surroundings of body cells which provides the cells with a medium in which they have to live. So we know that blood cells are found in blood and normal body cells are found within the interstitial fluid. So therefore the examples for internal environment of the body are interstitial fluid and blood. Then many animals and humans exhibit homeostasis for a range of physical and chemical properties. For example, humans maintain a fairly constant body temperature, blood pH, blood glucose and blood osmolality within narrow physiological limits. They are just examples. Then advantages of homeostasis. We can mainly mention two advantages. They are maintaining internal environment in a steady and balanced state and to establish optimum conditions for human body. And if a disadvantage of homeostasis is asked in the exam paper, then you should write homeostasis being an energy consuming process. That is a disadvantage, and these two are the advantages. Homeostatic control systems in the human body mainly depend on negative feedback mechanisms to maintain a constant level, thereby preventing serious changes in the internal environment. So that means simply homeostatic control systems, homeostatic processes are negative feedback mechanisms. Let's see what is a negative feedback mechanism. It is a mechanism where the parameter is taken back to the normal set point when fluctuated above or below the normal set point as detected by receptors by corrective mechanisms. That means this. There is a normal value to have for every parameter. Every parameter has a normal value. That is normal set point. When a fluctuation happens in the variable, that means a parameter, that is detected by receptors and is brought back to the normal set point by corrective mechanisms, which are responses triggered by a control center. Then once the parameter is restored back to normal, then the corrective mechanisms are stopped. So this is what you call a negative feedback mechanism. So we can see that there are several characters in a negative feedback mechanism. They are first the normal set point, then a particular parameter, then there should be receptors to detect the fluctuations, then there should be a control center, and there are responses or corrective mechanisms which are done to bring the parameter back to normal. So this is the outline of every homeostatic control mechanism. Every homeostatic control mechanism that we will be discussing further. Homeostasis is achieved by maintaining a variable, example body temperature, blood glucose, at or near a particular value. That is a set point. A fluctuation in the variable above or below the set point serves as a stimulus detected by a sensor, that is actually the receptors. So for receptors, that fluctuation is the stimulus. When a signal is received from the sensor, a control center generates an output. They are sensory signals that triggers a response, or that means the corrective mechanisms, actually, which is a physiological activity. Response is a physiological activity that helps to return the variable towards a set point level. The set point level is achieved by negative feedback control of the stimulus by the response. So stimulus means the fluctuated parameter, response means the corrective mechanism. So this is the outline of every homeostatic control mechanism. Then we will be discussing about three main processes which are homeostatically regulated in the body. Regulation of body temperature, regulation of blood glucose level, and osmoregulation. Then let's talk about regulation of body temperature. As the temperature affects the rate of chemical reactions, homeostatic control keeps the human body at optimum operating temperature. The normal body temperature of man is typically 37 degrees Celsius, or it can range between 36.5 degrees Celsius to 37.5 degrees Celsius. Human body temperature is controlled by negative feedback mechanisms. If the body temperature is outside, that means above or below the normal range, a group of nerve cells in the hypothalamus of the brain, that means the body's temperature control center, functions as a thermostat. So we can clearly see that this is the control center and responds to the temperature increase or decrease by doing two things: either by activating heat loss mechanisms or by promoting heat gain mechanisms. Heat loss mechanisms are activated when temperature is increased than usual. Heat gain mechanisms are implemented when temperature is reduced than usual, until the body temperature reaches the preset level. So that is the outline for the body temperature regulation. Then fluctuations of the temperature can happen in two ways. First, the fluctuations in peripheral temperature, that means the body surface temperature affected by external environment, and fluctuations in deep body temperature or the core temperature. This is actually the temperature inside blood. Then when fluctuations in peripheral temperature are considered, the receptors on the skin detect fluctuations of external temperature or the body surface temperature. There are two types of such receptors: Ruffini corpuscles and Clausen bulbs. Ruffini corpuscles can detect high temperature or warmth, and Clausen bulbs can detect low temperature or cold. Then when deep body temperature is considered, hypothalamic temperature sensitive nerve endings can detect variations in temperature in blood. So it is the hypothalamic sensitive nerve endings that can detect the core temperature. The receptors receive related stimuli and send nerve impulses to the body temperature control center, also called the thermostat. So receptors send nerve impulses to the control center. It has two main parts: heat loss center and the heat gain center. So when fluctuations happen, mechanisms are implemented by the body which are corrective mechanisms of negative feedback mechanism. So let's see what happens when body temperature rises than usual. High peripheral temperature, example when the person is in hot surroundings, is detected by warm receptors in the skin or Ruffini corpuscles. High deep body temperature, that can happen due to high body heat generation after exercises and all. That is just an example how body temperature, deep body temperature can rise, is detected by hypothalamic temperature sensitive nerve endings when warm blood passes through the hypothalamus. Then now detection happens. Then these nerve impulses are sent to the body's temperature control center or the thermostat in the hypothalamus. Now the control center is being massaged about this fluctuation. In response to the increase in body temperature above the preset level, the thermostat in the hypothalamus send impulses to activate heat loss mechanisms and to inhibit heat gain mechanisms that lower the body temperature until the set point. So until the normal set point 37 degrees Celsius is achieved, once again hypothalamus send nerve impulses to activate heat loss mechanisms and inhibit heat gain mechanisms. So they are the corrective mechanisms implemented. Then when heat loss mechanisms implemented are considered, first, dilation of blood vessels in the skin which causes filling of blood capillaries with warm blood radiating heat from the skin surface. So when the superficial arteries near the skin surface are dilated, the amount of warm blood passing through those capillaries increase. Therefore, heat can be lost through the skin surface by radiation. Then this can promote heat loss. Then increased sweat secretion from sweat glands which promotes heat dissipation through evaporative cooling. Now sweat is released from the body surface after absorbing excessive amount of heat. Then by evaporative cooling, heat dissipation can happen. Now these are the heat loss mechanisms implemented. Now when these heat loss mechanisms are implemented, body temperature comes back to normal, to the normal 37 degrees Celsius range. Then when the body temperature is within the normal range again, the warm temperature sensitive receptors are no longer stimulated. Receptors are not stimulated anymore and their signals to the hypothalamic thermostat stop due to negative feedback mechanism. Then what happens? The corrective mechanisms are also stopped. Therefore, additional heat loss mechanisms stop and blood flow to peripheries returns to normal. The amount of blood that passed to the peripheral arteries gets restored once again. So this is how body temperature is regulated when body temperature tends to rise than usual. Then when the body temperature drops down than usual, when body temperature drops down than 37 degrees Celsius, this is what happens. Low peripheral temperature when in cold surroundings is detected by cold receptors or crow's and bulbs in the skin. Low deep body temperature that can happen due to more heat loss and low heat generation in the body. Due to several reasons this can happen is detected by the temperature sensitive nerve endings in the hypothalamus. These nerve impulses are sent to the body's temperature control center or the thermostat in the hypothalamus. If the body temperature decreases below the preset level, the thermostat in hypothalamus sends nerve impulses to activate heat gain mechanisms and inhibit heat loss mechanisms, a completely opposite thing to the previous process. When body temperature increased than usual, the opposite thing happened. And here heat gain mechanisms are activated and heat loss mechanisms are inhibited, thereby increasing the body temperature until the Then when the heat gain and conservation mechanisms are considered, the following heat conservation and gain mechanisms promote the increase in body temperature. First, constriction of blood vessels in the skin which divert the blood from skin to deeper tissues, thereby reducing heat loss through skin surface. So now this is the opposite thing. So when the superficial arteries are constricted, the amount of cold blood passing through those superficial arteries reduce. Therefore, heat loss through the skin surface by radiation can be reduced. So heat can be conserved. Then shivering. Rapid repetitive contractions of skeletal muscles to generate heat. So shivering can generate a small amount of heat. Then contracting hair erector muscles to generate heat to some extent. Now this causes the hairs on our skin surface to erect up. That what happens there is when the hairs erect, an air column is formed there, and that air column can act as an insulator between the environment and the skin surface, preventing heat loss. That is how heat is conserved there. Then stimulating secretions of more thyroid hormones like thyroxine and adrenaline into blood, which increase the metabolic rate and cellular metabolism, especially oxidation of fat in the liver to produce more heat. When hormones like thyroxine and adrenaline are released more into blood, then they can increase the metabolic rate and cellular metabolism, especially when it comes to oxidation of fat in liver. Now these processes can generate some heat. So that is how heat is generated in the body. So these are the basic mechanisms implemented when body temperature reduces than normal. When body temperature returns to the normal range, the cold temperature sensitive receptors are no longer stimulated and their signals to hypothalamic thermostat stop due to negative feedback mechanism. So this is what usually happens. Then the additional heat generating mechanisms like shivering, contraction of hair erector muscles, Likewise, those additional heat generating mechanisms in the body stop and the blood flow to the peripheries return to normal. The superficial blood vessels get the normal amount of blood supply that it always got. So this is how body temperature is regulated in our body. Then we can move on to the second process, homeostatic regulation of the blood glucose level. Glucose is used up by all our blood cells as a substrate for aerobic respiration. We know that. Once all the body cells get the required amount of glucose, there is a value for the normal amount of glucose to be remaining, dissolved in blood for the immediate needs of the body, just like emergencies. And that amount is a normal set point. So after giving all the body cells the required amount of glucose for respiration, there is a particular amount of glucose that should be present within blood for emergency situations of the body. Now that is called the normal set point, and that amount is 70 to 110 milligram per 100 milliliter. A value in between 70 and 100 should be there. 110 milligrams should be there in 100 milliliters of blood. Now this is as tested while fasting. Now this much is sufficient for the immediate needs of the body cells. The blood glucose levels can fluctuate throughout the day within physiological limits. Within physiological limits means no need of homeostatic regulation in that change. No, it is not a significant change. In non-diabetic persons, in the human body, blood sugar levels are homeostatically controlled by the opposing actions of two hormones secreted by the pancreas. So when they are insulin and glucagon. When blood glucose level rises, insulin is involved. Actually, insulin is secreted by the beta cells of the pancreas. When blood glucose level drops, glucagon is involved. Glucagon is secreted by alpha cells of pancreas. Then let's see what happens when blood glucose level exceeds than usual. High blood glucose levels exceeding normal limits stimulate the secretion of insulin hormone from beta cells of islets of Langerhans into circulating blood. So remember, when blood glucose level rises than usual, insulin comes into action. It is secreted by beta cells of islets of Langerhans to blood. Insulin acts on specific target tissues to promote lowering of blood glucose level. So let's see what insulin does. Insulin in the circulating blood, the first thing that insulin does is stimulates the transport of glucose into body cells and use of glucose by body cells for ATP production. So there glucose can be broken down to carbon dioxide and water. So glucose will be used up by body cells, and then the amount of glucose can be reduced. Then second, conversion of glucose to glycogen in liver and skeletal muscles cells for storage. And third, conversion of glucose to fatty acids and storage of fat in adipose tissue. So simply, glucose makes the body cells insulin makes body cells use up glucose, and after that as well, if more glucose is remaining, then that will be converted to glycogen and stored in liver and skeletal muscles. And after that also, if an excess amount of glucose is remaining, then that will be converted to fatty acids and stored as fat in adipose tissues. When glucose, so now these are the things done by insulin. After insulin does all these things, glucose level in blood reaches the normal range. There, blood glucose level can in turn directly control the secretion of insulin levels from pancreas through negative feedback mechanisms. So when the glucose level is restored back to normal, what happens is no more stimulation of receptors, so no more secretion of insulin. Then what happens? The corrective mechanisms are also stopped. This mechanism prevents further lowering of blood glucose level in blood beyond the normal limit. So now if these processes keep going even after the lowering of blood glucose level to the normal set point, then blood glucose level might lower than the normal set point as well. So that is not done. So by negative feedback mechanisms, the corrective mechanisms are stopped. That is how insulin regulates the blood glucose level when blood glucose level exceeds than usual. Then when the blood glucose level drops than usual, Low blood glucose level below the normal limit stimulate the secretion of glucagon from alpha cells of islets of Langerhans into circulating blood. So here glucagon comes into action. Glucagon also acts on specific target tissues to promote the increase of blood glucose level. Then glucagon promotes first the breakdown of glycogen in the liver and skeletal muscles and release of glucose into blood. So that is the only thing that glucagon does. It promotes the breakdown of glycogen in liver and skeletal muscles to release the glucose in blood. It doesn't do anything else. After this is done, when the glucose level in blood will reach the normal range. Their blood glucose level can in turn directly control the secretion of glucagon levels from pancreas through negative feedback, which prevents further increase of glucose level in blood beyond normal limits. So what happens is, after the glucose level in blood reaches to the normal range, then no more stimulation of receptors, then no more secretion of glucagon from the pancreas. So in that case, no more corrective mechanisms are done. If the corrective mechanisms keep going, then the glucose level might increase. Glucose level might increase than the normal range if this keeps happening. So that is prevented by stopping the corrective mechanisms once the blood glucose level reaches the normal level. So this is how blood glucose level is regulated in humans. Then as a summary, we can say that insulin acts on liver cells, somatic cells, skeletal muscle fibers and adipose cells. And glucagon acts on liver cells and skeletal muscle fibers. Actually, liver cells means the hepatocytes. So this is an MCQ point. Knowing this is also important. Now we can move on to the third and the last process, that is osmoregulation. Osmoregulation is a process of maintaining water and salt balance, which is osmotic balance, across the membranes within body fluids relative to the surrounding. When there is osmotic balance, the amount of water and the concentration of salts, both the parameters, is same inside and outside the cell. So both amount of water and concentration of salts dissolved in water, both those parameters are same inside the cells as well as outside the cells. That is why there is an equilibrium. That is why we say that there is a balance. Osmoregulation is important for organisms to keep a constant optimal osmotic pressure within the body. In humans, osmoregulation ensures that the total blood volume and the concentration of dissolved substances in the plasma and tissue fluids remain constant within a favorable change. Now, within a favorable range. So this is what osmoregulation ensures in our body. Then in the human body, osmotic balance can be achieved in two ways: by controlling the amount of water and by controlling the amount of salt gained and lost by the body. So either of these two ways should be implemented for osmotic balance. Blood-water homeostasis is also controlled by the hypothalamus. So before going to the real part of the lesson, we have to know what is blood osmolarity, what is osmotic pressure for real. That is actually the pressure created by ions like sodium in blood. Now sodium is a significant ion, so we will be talking about sodium here. So the pressure created by ions, especially like sodium in blood, is osmotic pressure. So remember that concentration of ions in blood is directly proportional to the osmotic pressure, whereas amount of water in blood is inversely proportional to the osmotic pressure. When the amount of solvent increases, the pressure created by the ions decreases. But when the amount of ions, the concentration of ions increases, then the osmotic pressure or the pressure created by ions increases. So this is an outline that should be remembered. Hypothalamus contains osmoreceptors which can detect the osmolarity of blood passing through the brain. So hypothalamus has osmoreceptors as well. So they can detect the osmolarity or the osmotic pressure of blood passing through the brain. In response to osmolarity or osmotic pressure of blood, the hypothalamus controls two things. So hypothalamus can control two things. One, the sensation of thirst, and the other is secretion of the hormone ADH from posterior pituitary gland. So these two things are done by the hypothalamus. In osmoregulation, two hormones are involved. They are ADH and aldosterone. When the osmotic pressure is increased, that means when the amount of sodium is increased relative to water, ADH is involved. When osmotic pressure is decreased, aldosterone is involved. Then let's see those two processes. So before moving on to the real process, we have to know three facts. They are important. Blood volume and blood pressure and the concentration of sodium plus in blood, that means in the blood osmolarity, are directly proportional quantities. And the other thing is the water retention capacity in blood vessels depends on the blood sodium level. When the sodium plus concentration in blood is high, the water retention capacity is also high. And when the sodium plus concentration in blood is low, the water retention capacity is also low. So these are three important facts that should be remembered before moving on to the processes. When the blood osmolarity is increased, the amount of ions like sodium plus has increased than usual, or the amount of water in blood has decreased. So whatever it is, by either of these two ways, the concentration of sodium plus in blood has increased. Now this happens when too little amount of water is drunk, or maybe when too much salt has been consumed, or maybe when excessive sweating has happened. So because of these phenomena, then the concentration of sodium has increased than usual. That is why this has happened. Now this is what happens. When this happens, this is the remedy that is used. When blood osmolarity is increased beyond the physiological limits, it is sensed by the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus, which stimulates the posterior pituitary gland to release ADH to the blood circulation. Then ADH acts on the kidney tubules and stimulates a reabsorption of water through distal convoluted tubules of the nephrons and collecting ducts of kidney, producing concentrated urine. So that is a function of ADH. And here the urine produced is concentrated urine. Concentrated urine means the urine contains a very small amount of water, because water was reabsorbed and retained within the body, and water is not released with urine. So urine tends to be concentrated. And also the hypothalamus increases thirst. We said that hypothalamus can create the sensation of thirst. Then what happens? We will drink water. Then what happens? The amount of water increases, and then the blood pressure, blood volume and the osmotic pressure will be restored once again. Then the osmotic pressure, blood volume and the blood pressure are restored back to normal levels. Then no more stimulation of osmoreceptors, no more stimulation of hypothalamus, and no more secretion of ADH. Then the corrective mechanisms are stopped by negative feedback mechanisms. So that is how the body acts, the hypothalamus acts when blood osmolarity is increased. When blood osmolarity decreases, this happens due to dehydration or maybe due to loss of blood. So what happens here is concentration of sodium has decreased than usual. When blood osmolarity is decreased, osmoreceptors are not stimulated. They are not stimulated in this case. So ADH is not secreted. So when water reabsorption through distant convoluted tubules of the nephrons and collecting ducts stop, thereby producing diluted urine. When ADH is not secreted, diluted urine can be produced. This is the reason why diluted urine is produced. The ADH not being secreted is a reason why diluted urine is produced here. So in addition to this thing, actually another process happens. Low blood volume and low blood sodium ions stimulate the kidneys to produce a component called angiotensin II, which stimulates the adrenal cortex to secrete aldosterone hormone. Now aldosterone stimulates a reabsorption of sodium ions by kidney tubules, which is accompanied by water retention, thereby increasing blood volume and the blood pressure. Aldosterone increases the permeability of tubules to sodium. Then with that, water is reabsorbed to blood too. Then water retention in blood increases too. Initially when blood sodium was low, the water retention capacity was also low. Now previously I mentioned that blood volume, blood pressure and sodium ion concentration. They are directly proportional quantities. So when the blood sodium concentration is low, blood volume and blood pressure are also low. And the other thing I said was that now what happens is aldosterone comes into action and it increases the permeability of the kidney tubules to sodium, and then more sodium reabsorption occurs into blood. Now initially when the sodium I initially mentioned that sodium concentration is direct proportional to the water retention capacity as well. So initially when the sodium concentration in blood was low, the water retention capacity was also low. But now when aldosterone increases the permeability of tubules to sodium, sodium reabsorption happens and sodium concentration in blood is restored back to normal. Now with the increase of concentration of sodium in blood, water retention capacity in blood increases too. Now with that, a little more amount of water is added to blood too. Or because of all these things, what happens? Blood volume, blood pressure, blood osmolarity, everything is restored back to normal. So here the hormone that is involved is aldosterone. Then the blood osmolarity, blood volume and blood pressure increase and are restored back to normal levels. Then what happens? This is a negative feedback mechanism. No? Then the secretion of aldosterone will be stopped. Then what happens? Aldosterone is no more acting on the kidney tubules. No? So in that case, permeability of the membranes to sodium will be restored back again, and the sodium reabsorption will also be restored back to the normal levels. The normal amount of reabsorption will happen once again. So that is how osmoregulation happens in both cases where blood osmolarity is increased and decreased. Then comes the last part, role of the liver in homeostasis. Liver is an active organ and plays an important role in maintaining homeostasis of human body. The functions of the liver include the following. So these are the 6 main functions of the liver: carbohydrate metabolism, fat metabolism, protein metabolism, breakdown of erythrocytes and defense against microbial infections, detoxification of drugs and toxicants, and production of heat. We will be discussing first one, carbohydrate metabolism. The liver plays an important role in maintaining blood glucose levels within normal ranges. Now we discussed this previously in the regulation of blood glucose level. When blood glucose is increased, just like after a meal, glucose is stored as glycogen under the stimulation of insulin. We discussed that. And if the blood glucose level is reduced, like in starvation, glycogen is converted back to glucose under the influence of glucagon hormone. So we know that glycogen is mainly stored in the liver, and it is stored and glycogen is produced when glucose level is high, and glycogen is used up when the glucose level is low. So liver plays an important role in maintaining blood glucose level. The second one, fat metabolism. When the body needs excess energy, fats that are stored in liver cells are metabolized to produce ATP. Now we discussed this as well. When the blood glucose level is high, even after the conversion of excessive glucose into glycogen, even after that, if there is excess glucose, then that glucose will be converted to fat, and that will be stored in liver and the adipose tissues, mainly in the adipose tissues, and some part will be stored in liver as well. Now when glucose is needed to the body, fat oxidation happens in the liver. The fat stored in liver will be oxidized and will be metabolized to produce ATP directly. So we can see that in fat metabolism, liver plays an important role as well. Then protein metabolism. In liver cells, nitrogen part of some amino acids that are not needed for new protein synthesis are removed, that is deamination, and excreted in urine or transferred to carbohydrates to synthesize new non-essential amino acids, or that is transamination. So we can take two definitions out of that. Deamination means the removal of the nitrogen part of some amino acids that are not needed for new protein synthesis. Then transamination means the synthesis of new non-essential amino acids using the nitrogen part of some amino acids transferred to carbohydrates. So those two definitions can be extracted out. Then liver also synthesizes plasma proteins like albumin and globulins from amino acids. So that is protein. Then the fourth one, breakdown of erythrocytes and defense against microbial infections. In humans, liver is a site for red blood cell breakdown. We know that erythrocytes are broken down in liver. This is also called homeolysis of erythrocytes. Macrophages located in the liver are involved in microbial defense. We know the structure of the liver. We know there are macrophages called Kupffer cells, and they are involved in microbial defense. Then detoxification of drugs and toxicants. The liver plays an important role in detoxification. A lot of drugs and toxic substances are detoxified by the liver. Then last one, production of heat. Liver is a major heat producing organ of the body as it has a high metabolic rate. So they are the main functions of the liver, and that's the end of the lesson. I hope you found this video useful and informative, and I wish you all the very best for your A-level exam. Thank you.